Hello, unforgettable vocalists. It is time for the Reclaim Your Voice podcast. I am your host, O'Neill Gerald Donald, and we are on episode 4 of our wonderful podcast. Now, we've had a little bit of time to talk about the signs and the strain of when your voice doesn't belong to you, and I decided to kind of give you guys a little bit of a breather because I know that we're coming with some really hard truths, and I know for me, sometimes I read some of the stuff that I was talking about, and I was just like, whoa, oh gosh, or I'll see one of the reels on Instagram, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that's such a hard truth, but that's part of what reclaiming your voice is all about. It's about getting yourself out of the denial that your voice actually belongs to you, and that and the fact that you've been using your voice in a way that is not conducive to your own growth and strength, and simply stepping into the proper use of your voice. And that is on a technical level, but it's also on a mental level, just getting your mind right to be able to think of your voice in the correct way. And this is going to be a little bit more of the technical side. And it's a conversation that came as an idea, and I was like, okay, I think this is going to be something that's great to talk about. But before we get into that, I wanted to just kind of clarify who this podcast is for. This podcast is for if you are singing every week, but you're losing your voice after you finish singing. This podcast is for you if you are trying to be better at your singing, but or get better in your trying to better your singing, and you're just plateauing, and you're finding yourself that in your practice, you're not getting better, even though you're working harder. This podcast is for you if you struggled with building confidence in your own voice, and you aren't quite sure if you're able to hit the goals that you have for your music. And this podcast is also for you if you secretly believe that you can't sing, right? This is the place where we're helping to set the stage for your voice to be at its full potential. We're helping you to take your singing from unsure to unforgettable, breaking your bad singing habits, helping you to find your unique sound, and to keep and stop you from losing your voice. So I wanted to talk to you today about build versus use. And so what I mean by build versus use is I'm simply talking about the philosophy of what we think our voice is. Now, when you hear the word voice, and especially when you think of, top 40, hot 100 songs that you might hear on the radio, you hear someone's voice, often people will say, oh yeah, that person has a nice voice. But when they say the word voice, they mean a whole bunch of different things that combine to make what we know as the voice. And this conversation about build versus use is part of the delineation, or just creating a dividing line between at least two parts of what make up a person's sound. Now, a lot of what we are hearing on the radio is actually what we call what we call someone's voice. A lot of what we hear on the radio is not necessarily just someone's voice, but it is their sound. Now, if you take all of the post-production and all of the mixing and all of the auto tunes and stuff like that away, you still, when you hear someone's vocal on the radio, you're not just listening to their voice. You are listening to that person's voice, the build of that person's voice, filtered through their use of their particular voice. Right? The reason why it's important to understand what build is and what use is, and kind of separate them, is because a lot of people are thinking that they can't sing based on this convoluted definition of what the voice is, rather than understanding their voice and the use of their voice as two separate things, right? And so we're gonna today just help to kind of start to create that dividing line, right? But we need to understand the difference between build and use, and so that's what we're kind of gonna get into today. But the reason why it's like I have a few reasons here why you need to understand the difference between vocal build and use. But that's where I was trying to go. We need to talk about what build is and what use is. Now, when I say build, or when I say a person's vocal build, now that isn't necessarily a technical term. You might have heard words like a vocal fach, right? That might talk about a person's voice type. You might probably that's probably the closest one that you might have heard to talk about the build of someone's voice. But when we talk about the build of someone's voice, we're really talking about how a person's physical instrument is created, how the person's body is created, what the design of their body is, so and thus what their natural sound is out as a result of that build. So depending on your gender, depending on your body's build, people have naturally higher voices, people have naturally lower voices. Male voices tend to be lower than female voices, although you sometimes will find male voices that are higher. But regardless of all of the dividing lines, when we're talking about the build of someone's voice, we're talking about what their voice naturally does. And you'll often hear people using their voice in its most natural form when they speak, when they talk. Like me, in my natural form, my voice is not the lowest of the low, but it's not the highest of the high either. It kind of lies somewhere in the middle, right? And so when we're looking at voice build, we're looking at the physical attributes that create someone's voice or that contribute to someone's voice. Those attributes are things that are immutable. They're things that don't change unless, we get in there and, create changes, or, maybe someone takes hormones and changes their voice. But without outside help, a person's voice is going to be their voice, and it's going to just simply stay the same. Now, with physical changes, for example, pregnancy and childbirth with women, someone's voice can change. Or like when a boy is going through puberty to become a man, he goes through changes in his voice drops. Mine did that, right? There are certain transitions in life that can create changes in your voice, but all of that is already written in your DNA, right? So regardless of the changes that may happen, though, there are specific parameters that your body has set your voice to be within. And when we talk about vocal build, we're talking about that. Right? Now, when we talk about vocal use, or the use of someone's voice, we are talking about how a person will take their vocal build and put their voice in different situations by singing. Right? Now, it may not even just be singing. It might be shouting, depending on what you're doing. But depending on the vocal situation that you put yourself in, whether you're singing, or whether you're singing high, whether you're singing low, whether you're belting, whether you're using your head voice, there are so many different things that you can do with your voice. And vocal use is really the thing that helps us to understand when we're using the build of our voice. Now, the reason why the two can get convoluted is because when someone is using their voice, we're hearing their vocal build and the use of their voice at the same time. And so we can sometimes, convolute and just blend the two together as if they're the same thing, when they're really not. And it's very important, especially as unforgettable vocalists and not just singers, to understand the difference between build and use, because if we don't understand the difference, we can overshoot what we actually can do and think that we are just misusing our voice. So with build, for example, there are certain parameters that our body has, right? And sometimes we can, belt a whole bunch out of our genuine range. And range is something that's a part of build, although use touches it as well. But when we're genuinely going outside of our voice's reach, right? Out of the build of our voice's reach, sometimes we can think, oh man, I'm just not using my voice properly, when in general, you're going outside of the parameters of your vocal build, right? Now, secondly, if we don't understand the difference between build and use, we can limit our voice right? And we can just say, oh yeah, that's just how it is, when we're actually not using a functional technique to use our voice. So this is the vice versa. Sometimes we can underuse our voice and think that oh my gosh, this is just how my voice is, and we can blame the way that our voice sounds all on a vocal build, when we just genuinely don't know how to actually use our voice with proper technique. Right now, so if we lean too much on the build side or too much on the use side, we can actually confuse ourselves as to what our voice is actually capable of. And then lastly, there's two other points. In our confusion, we can also write off what our voice can do and assume that it's no good. So when we think of the build of our voice, like say I'm a bass, and I don't necessarily go as high as say like a Chris Brown or an Usher, right? But my voice is simply it's lower, right? And there are specific parameters that are on lower voices, right? A bass can sometimes write off themselves as if their voice is no good, when they're actually just not aware of the strengths that come with having a bass voice. Basses can hit some notes that nobody else on earth can, and especially in choral situations, those notes can have different feel and a different thunder, right? There are so many different, and often if you include a bass's head voice and falsetto, they can have a full expanse of the choir at their arsenal. So when it comes to, like, for me, I'm not necessarily a bass, but having a lower voice and having falsetto access, I can actually sing the entire choir. Right? There's so many different pluses that are there, that are lying hidden in our voices, but because we don't understand its use, we just default to our build. Because we don't understand proper use, we can just default to build and just feel like, oh yeah, it's no good, when really we just don't know the full parameters of how we can actually use it. So, and then also, I'll even put in a fourth point of why we need to understand the difference between build and use, is we don't learn how to take advantage of our own voice's strengths, and we constantly look out on the strength of others, right? So that's probably an extension of, thinking of your voice as no good. Because we're not used to what our voice can do, and we don't think that our voice can do anything really, we just take it out of the parameters that actually it's supposed to be in, and we look at and listen to other people that are using their voices well, that understand their voices use and build, and or understand their voices build and use the build of their voice to their advantage, and we're like, oh my gosh, that person sounds good, and we just emulate them without ever discovering what we can do, right? So that's why we really need to really draw the lines here. So I'm just going to take a little bit of a moment. I have 3 points, not too much, of the difference between a vocal build and vocal use, right? Now, point number 1, build or vocal build is something that you cannot change. Use is something that you can change. Now, in today's day and age, there are surgeries and there are things that you can do to change your voice. So when I say that build is something that you cannot change, I'm not talking about, outside influence. I'm talking about in the use of your voice. My voice isn't ever going to sound like, I don't know, Ariana Grande. Like even if you look at our speaking voices, she kind of talks up here, especially when she's rested. She kind of talks up here in terms of range, right? But I talk down here, right? As a result of the way that my body is built, right? That's not going to change anytime soon, right? Now, use is something that you can change, right? Now, I may talk down here, right? But in using my voice's build, I can actually use the lighter side of my voice and access this higher part of my voice and go, there's just so many different parts of me that are now at my disposal, right? There's different things that are available to me if I just simply use what is already there. The problem is, a lot of us are looking to use what actually isn't there. Right? And especially when we're listening to people that are that have great voices and that use their voices well. I don't even want to use that term, having a great voice. Let's not even use that in this conversation. We listen to people that use their voices well, and we just simply we lust and get jealous of what they have, and so we leave what we have, and so we don't get acquainted with what our voice can do, and so we just kind of go to what they can do, and so we don't understand how to actually use our voices build and understand it so that we can sing with freedom, right? So build is something that you cannot change, but use is something that you can change, right? Again, in terms of use, there are different vocal situations that you can create where you are creating bigger sounds, lighter sounds to actually use the fullness of what God's given you, right? And often, and you know what, I would need to do a study on this for it to actually be correct, but I find that people, when they learn what their voice can actually do, they actually end up liking using it much more than trying to emulate somebody else, right? I feel like that's even a safe statement to make. When somebody learns about vocal use and understands technique and understands what their voice can actually do, they rather allow their voice to just be in its natural state rather than lust after someone else's voice, right? Why? Because it's easier, right? Good singing and good technical singing is actually very freeing. And although there is a hard work in terms of learning how to get back to the natural use of our voices, once we're there, singing is actually a lot of fun. And using the fullness of what our voice can do in its entirety, it's extremely fun. Right. And I know that singing is supposed to be that type of fun for everyone. Right. So it's about getting more acquainted with how we're supposed to use our vocal build. Now, number 2, some people think this is the second difference between build and use. Some people think that build is the ultimate limiter for what their voice can do, when 9 times out of 10, it is use that is actually doing the limiting. This is a little bit of what I talked about before with the whole, that's just how my voice is. That's just what my voice does. Now, if you are a technician, right? Like you have been, studying your voice for God knows how long. And this is where I would include the classical conversation as well. If you have been and actually, you know what? Sometimes classically, you may get misdiagnosed. Some people might have called you a lyric soprano, or you might be a dramatic soprano, or like somebody might have classified you a baritone when you're actually a tenor. Right? Like for me, I'm actually really much more of a second tenor rather than a true baritone. So there are things that can get confused there. But especially when we get like vocal classifications, we can really think that, oh my gosh, now that I'm a baritone, I can only do such and such and such and such and such. When actually what the real limiter is not our voices build, but actually our limited understanding of vocal technique and our limited understanding of use, right? If we actually used our voices in the way that they actually are capable of being used, we'll actually see that every single voice type has a lot more range than we would think, right? But sometimes because we're lazy, sometimes because we also have our own inner facts about what our voice is and who we are as singers, we definitely can have a part in just limiting ourselves and just blaming it on our voice when actually we just don't know how to use our voice properly, right? I've done a lot of the same things, just in thinking, oh my gosh, I can't sing high. No, I'm just singing too hard, right? So that's another thing. Like, depending on, I wouldn't say that build would be the true limiter of somebody's voice until someone has really studied their voice and worked with an expert and really just completely understood their voice from the bottom up, right? If that is something that you really understand and it's something that you've studied, I'm really moving my cup so that it's still in the shot. But anyway, for those of you that are watching, anyway, for those of us that have actually studied, I think that build would be much more of a limiter. Like what our voice, the way our bodies are built would be much more of the true limiter. But most of us haven't actually even taken the time to study what our voices can actually do, let alone learn how to actually use it. So if that's you, you have no business limiting what your voice can do when you haven't even discovered how to even use it, right? It's about increasing your knowledge and actually taking yourself to a place where you're not just making excuses for what really is just poor technique, right? And if we lean on those excuses, we'll end up putting ourselves in a position to be dissatisfied with our voices and sometimes, not even want to sing at all when really we just didn't understand how to use it, right? Now, so those are 2 points. And the second point, I don't even know if that was a difference, but it was just on my heart, so I just put it there. But the third and final difference is that use can be applied universally to voices to bring out the best in them, while build creates the parameters for what a voice sounds like in its best use. So that's the thing. Build, so even making that a little bit more simple, use is universal. Build is not universal. When it comes to the true build of somebody's voice, not all voices are built alike. No, not at all. But the use of voices, especially when you've started to work with an expert to actually learn your body's relationship with your voice, so that you can actually put yourself in an optimal place to create sound. Build is what did I just say? I don't. I have to kind of rewind and just kind of remember what I was saying. But use is universal, right? When we've actually taken the time to actually, again, study our voices, we learn concepts that are absolutely applicable to every single voice type. Now, there are certain things that different people with different voices may do slightly different than other voices, but generally, when it comes to breathing, when it comes to placement, when it comes to posture, all of those different things, generally those different types of things that go into technique are universal. And because they are universal, this means that anybody can sing. Anybody. And I purposely want to pause on that because a lot of us think that we can't sing, right? And even at the top of this episode, I talked about who this is for. A lot of you have been told that you can't sing, when in reality, you've just never been shown the way. Right? There are some people that have a natural musical ear. There's some people that have musical upbringings, especially if you've gone to church every single week. Chances are you have an ear for music. But a lot of you have never had that opportunity. And so you have been thinking that your voice is no good, thinking that your voice is broken and that it can't do what someone else's can do. And although that may be true, you haven't truly discovered what your voice's true potential is. And that's because you haven't taken the time to actually sit with an expert for an extended period of time and actually work with the voice that you've been given. You've been so busy looking and thinking about other people and other voices that you have never taken the time to understand your own. And this is the time where I want to give you an opportunity to actually do that. So I want you to just book a call with me at reclaimyourvoice.ca/call, reclaimyourvoice.ca/call, because it is time for you to stop making excuses about the call that is on your life, the genuine calling that you have to sing, and stop making excuses for it, and just learn to use your voice in a way that actually allows you to express what's been on the inside for so long. There are so many of you that have been wanting to express yourself in song, but because of the limiting the inner facts that you've kept that have told you, oh my gosh, my voice is this, my voice is that, I can do this, I can do that. You've limited yourself and you've made excuses, and a lot of you are getting older and are still believing the same excuses, right? Now is the time to make that change. So I want you to go to reclaimyourvoice.ca/call and book a voice breakthrough call with me. Let's get down to what's not working with your voice, and let's see if we can actually build some steps so that you can actually get to where you need to be vocally. And for everyone else that's listening to this podcast, it's not about whether or not your voice is good enough. And I think that's really the root of this conversation. Sometimes Sometimes we completely disqualify ourselves from the race before we've even started running. We've said, oh my gosh, I need to have this, and I need to do this, and I need to watch this video, and I need to, study music theory, and I need to do this, this, and this, this, and this, to justify why you shouldn't run in the race, when in reality, in being given a voice, you've already been put in the running, and you've been given a race to run with your voice. You've been given a song to sing with your voice. And because of all of those excuses, and especially because of peer pressure, even as well, a lot of us have been, just sitting on what we wanted to do for the entire time. And if that's you, I encourage you as well to book a call at reclaimyourvoice.ca/call. But also, I want you to still be a part of this conversation at the Reclaim Your Voice podcast. So I want you to subscribe to this podcast, follow, and let's continue the conversation on what it means to get your voice back. Because a lot of you have been crippled by the opinions of others. And it's time for us to really clip the wings on all of your insecurities and allow you to discover your voice's true potential. Anyway, I'm O'Neal Gerald Donald, and this is the end of today's podcast, but I'll see you all. I did it again. I will hear you all. Not necessarily. You will hear me next week, Thursday. And you guys, until then, you guys have a blessed day, right? Bye.